Nintendo Pictures. It's the latest subsidiary in Nintendo's suite of companies and the one that is attracting a lot of attention with the outsized success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. But what is it? Who runs it? What has it done? How did it start? And what is coming next? People have been asking for this video for a long time, but it's actually quite a tricky one to get a good grip on, as the company itself is not necessarily, at this point in time, connected much at all with Nintendo's motion picture strategy. What I've tried to do therefore is give you not just a review of the company, but also to show how Nintendo's cinematic plans are coming along and how these two separate initiatives appear destined to intersect. This video script was shown to Patreons ahead of time for their input, so please feel free to hit up the link below if you'd like to get involved as well. Other than that, get ready for another Nintendo Forecast deep dive. So to understand Nintendo Pictures, we first need to get to know its predecessor, the rather less impressively titled Dynamo Pictures Inc., and that company's founder, one Kenji Yoshida. Born in Fukui City in Japan in 1954, he graduated from Tokyo University in Science in the Department of Architecture and became a researcher in nuclear power before starting in-house work developing computer graphics. After leaving the company, he started his own, a new company specializing in computer graphics and virtual reality research back in the heady days of 1991. He called it Visual Science Laboratory Company Limited. This was a success, with Japan's first digital creator school starting in 1994 and a university following in 2005. He set up multiple companies from this point, including in April 1996 a game production agency that would start to have many brushes with Nintendo, called Polygon Magic Incorporated. You may not recognize the name, but you will recognize their work, as they are credited on games as diverse as Xenoblade Chronicles X, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the Bit Generations games, and Disney Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse. With 274 Tokyo-based staff, they identify their contribution to Tears of the Kingdom specifically as cinematic animation production. However, in April 2004, a spin-off of the original Visual Science Laboratory company was spun off to form the newly minted Dynamo Pictures. It would still be a long time before their partnership with Nintendo began, but they were no strangers to the Big N as a company. On those occasions that Nintendo branched into CG-heavy titles, Dynamo Pictures were there. They supported on Metroid Other M and Bayonetta 2, but perhaps the closest project to Nintendo's heart, or at least to its creative fellow Shigeru Miyamoto, was the production of 3 Pikmin short films in 2014. Versions of these films were released on the 3DS in 3D, on Wii U in HD, and they are now on Nintendo's YouTube channel. They were also in many respects Shigeru Miyamoto's first major step into film creation, and they debuted at the 2014 Tokyo International Film Festival. Between 2 and 10 minutes in length, these are not mega epics, but it did give Nintendo a toehold in developing short animations of their very own. If this was part of some dramatic master plan to pivot Nintendo into the silver screen, Shigeru Miyamoto gave no hint of it in his interviews at the time. He said, "Sometimes I wonder about things like, wouldn't it be fun if Pikmin did this? Or what would happen if there was a Pikmin right here? Those ideas have been turned into an animation in the Pikmin short movies. I hope that you will take a peek at a day in the life of Pikmin and see what they're up to when they have jumped out of the game." Still, he would come to use this later as a touchstone for doing other entertainment experiences, and clearly it helped build his relationships with the people at Dynamo. At this point though, film as a separate concern from Nintendo's games still seemed to be a long way away from their considerations. Nintendo had made a few tentative steps into film, including the perhaps ill-judged live-action Super Mario Bros. Movie of the 90s and a few American animations. The Bob Hoskins-led picture had been significantly driven by the then head of Nintendo of America, Minoru Arakawa, also then CEO Hiroshi Yamauchi's son-in-law, and therefore connected by marriage to Nintendo's founding family. Sadly, it soon earned a negative reputation. Shigeru Miyamoto, years later, was diplomatic, telling Edge magazine in 2007, "Well, When we first initiated talks about a Super Mario Bros. Movie, I tried to emphasize the point that the Mario Bros. Games are fun as video games, and if we were going to make a Mario Bros. Movie, that movie should be entertaining as a movie and not a translation of the video game. I think that they tried very hard, and in the end it was a fun project that they put a lot of effort into. The one thing that I still have some regrets about is that the movie may have tried to get a little too close to what the Mario Brothers video games were, and in that sense, it became a movie that was about a video game rather than being an entertaining movie in and of itself. However, Miyamoto-san's sense of diplomacy didn't extend to taking any personal responsibility for it, saying, "I didn't collaborate with them a whole lot. Obviously I was involved in the initial pitch about them wanting to make a movie. After they had started production and had filmed some scenes, there was a step there where we were a little bit involved." And if Miyamoto was diplomatic, many other people involved took a different approach. Bob Hoskins, for example, branded the film a fundamental nightmare, although he used a more colourful word than fundamental. He explained the whole experience was a nightmare. It had a husband and wife team directing whose arrogance had been mistaken for talent. After so many weeks, their own agent told them to get off the set. Fundamental nightmare. Fundamental idiots. The rest of the star cast, including Dennis Hopper, also broadly disowned it, and the picture was a critical bomb and became a punchline. Still, this didn't chase the company away from picture deals entirely. In Japan, they co-owned Warp Star Inc., which handles the Kirby license and which has especially helped to commission and run the Kirby Right Back At Ya anime series. And of course, Nintendo also were heavily involved since the late 90s with Pokemon, but handling that massive franchise required them to spin off their own company, the Pokemon Company, of which they were only directly 32% owners. The point is that while Nintendo had a lot of contacts in the world of film, television and animation, they were by no means ready to take the lead themselves, nor were Dynamo Pictures the only game in town for Nintendo when it came to narrative film projects. For the more anime-styled Star Fox The Battle Begins, Link to Star Fox Zero, they tapped WIT Studios, who had previously worked on Pokemon anime projects. For the 2006 Animal Crossing movie, they tapped Oriental Light and Magic, OLM, plus major Japanese film distributor Toho to bring their vision to life. And it seems that Nintendo were fairly happy to let television and film versions of their projects bubble up very occasionally and fade away, like shooting stars passing by. Shigeru Miyamoto moves to BuzzFeed in 2013 about the prospect of a Mario movie. There have been a lot of cases where we've been approached by different people with lots of different ideas, he said. And I don't want to say that it's impossible, but I don't want you to get the impression that we're in the middle of making a movie or something. But we always have to take into account the fact that game entertainment and movie entertainment is quite different, one being passive and one being active. Those don't always necessarily mix. He later reflected more deeply in a Q&A in 2021, where he attributed the decision to move to creating mobile content as instrumental in the decision to ultimately pursue film. He said, "Working on mobile content reminded us again that while the Nintendo game systems may have reached some parts of the world, there are many places where they are not widespread. We started the mobile business because we felt it very important to conduct activities that encourage people to understand the Nintendo brand and come to like Nintendo. That resulted in also realizing the importance of visual content. By possessing video content and not just games, Nintendo will be able to expand its content further throughout the world and become stronger as a company." So it seems that, as often is the case with Nintendo, necessity was the mother of invention, and in 2015 the company was at its lowest ebb in a long time, with the 3DS, yes, having steadied itself after a poor start, but the Wii U flatlining and the Switch still an uncertain hope years away. At this point, then President Satoru Iwata was quite direct with shareholders about the plans that were taking place, plans which extended the company beyond the highly uncertain realm of video games, but also plans which the company would be very cautious about and very incremental about enacting. He said, "We have the desire to own related products. On the other hand, we have to be wary of whether more Nintendo licensed products will make a better situation. In the short term, it may receive much attention. Incomes such as licensing fees may increase, and we might be able to grant some people's wishes. But along with that, we also have to consider correct quality control, maintaining and managing character value. Most products in the character industry are consumption-based in that they continuously repeat the process of birth and death. Only a handful of characters can last for 1, 2, or 3 decades. Nintendo's IP strategy is based on a long-term perspective where we continue to enhance our characters, worlds, and settings for years. We have already announced that we would more actively utilize our IP, but not in the way that we try to increase the number of licensing partners as much as possible. Instead, we will proactively try anything that will enhance the value of our IP. We believe that it is not worth attempting initiatives that produce short-term profits at the expense of long-term detrimental effects on our IP. You might be unsatisfied with our pace of IP utilization, but we ask for your understanding. Of course, this makes a lot of sense. Mario, Pokemon, and Kirby are advertising juggernauts, but Nintendo always has to consider the bigger picture. The laughable 90s Mario movie still haunted them a decade later, so having poor quality content in the more public forms of television and film could be detrimental to their core business and their hard-won reputation. Furthermore, Nintendo has limited resources and focus. As much as I would love the cast of Advance Wars to be new iconic mascots, it's probably as well that they focused on building up a smaller group of characters, including Link, Isabelle, and the Inklings from Splatoon. Iwata-san expanded on his answers in a subsequent statement, and this is one of the first times that movies and television programs were specifically referenced by him. He said, "This answer overlaps with what I discussed in my answer about IP utilization earlier, but it would be a stretch to say that Nintendo was proactive in making merchandise in the past. We have been discussing internally that we should be more proactive, and it is imperative that we establish a global structure to deploy such business all around the world. As a large proportion of our sales come from outside Japan, we have various ideas in mind for collaboration on the character licensing business across Japan, North America, and Europe, and this expansion won't be limited to merchandise. It may take various forms, including, for example, images or even movies or TV programs. Even though I am not sure of the actual forms, it is safe to say that in addition to profitable licensing businesses, Nintendo will take risks we believe are worthwhile. On the other hand, not a small number of businesses have ended up with a pile of leftover stock after a particular product's short-lived period of popularity. It would surely ruin the value of Nintendo IP and would not enhance corporate value over the long term if we chose this path. Therefore, I would like to recap that our current plan is not to simply increase the number of proposals, but to be more proactive than in the past by making appropriate decisions that will enhance our overall corporate value in the long term. That proactivity is still bearing fruit today with the theme parks, the Mario movie, and even promotional approaches like the increased focus on Mario Day and Pokemon Day as specific events. Or even movies or television programs grew to be a major part of Nintendo's vision for the future as well. Leaked emails from Sony proved that Avi Arad was even in 2013 building long-term relationships with Nintendo with a view to bagging the rights to a Mario movie, and at this point seemed very confident that the deal could be close. At one point he said, "I am heading to Tokyo. I am going to try and bring back a little plumber. I guess we can all use our pipes cleaned." Evidently Nintendo felt their pipes were clean enough without Avi Arad's help at this juncture, although of course the producer of the original Spider-Man later got to pay off his long courtship of the Nintendo Brains Trust by securing the rights to a live-action Zelda film in 2023. Instead, Miyamoto-san was busy building relationships with someone else who would be instrumental in Nintendo's movie business, Chris Meledandri of Minions fame, who was helping with the theme park project that became Super Nintendo World. Discussions on the film deepened in 2016, and a deal was finally struck in 2017. At this point, I think it's worth saying that none of this had anything to do with Dynamo or the company that was to become Nintendo Pictures. This was in fact another one-off deal being struck by Nintendo with a group whose skill set could help them deliver a strong final product. However, there were some differences from previous enterprises. First of all, Shigeru Miyamoto would be producing the film alongside Meledandri. It would also be a priority for Illumination, and Miyamoto-san would be, to quote Meledandri, front and centre of the project. He also elaborated, "It's an ambitious task. The challenge is taking things that are so thin in their original form and finding depth that doesn't compromise what generations of fans love about Mario, but also feels organic to the iconography and can support a 3-act structure." The difference between the development of this film and the prior ventures is significant, with Nintendo's most senior creative right in the driving seat. Shuntaro Furukawa in 2021 conducted an interview with Fast Company in which he noted that the plan to push Nintendo IPs more into film and television had been developing over the space of a decade, but that there were many considerations in play. Animation in general is something that we are looking into, and not just this franchise, he said, adding, "Something we really made sure to avoid was that when being engaged in this IP expansion outside game development, that we don't cut into the game development resources on our side, and to realise that we made sure that although people who deeply understand the characters and deeply understand the games are involved, that we keep the number of people involved to a minimum." Again, this makes sense strategically for Nintendo. Movies have a lot of potential for Nintendo, but their investors' report shows clearly every year that it is their video game business that really keeps the lights on, and if they were to rob Peter to pay Paul by taking their top creatives into a new field they weren't familiar with, it could harm their core business. He also said that we must make sure that the results are true to the players' experiences and that they would never prevent Nintendo's developers from making another unique game featuring the same characters. And although this quote relates to the theme parks, you can bet your bottom dollar his philosophy extends to the film projects as well. He said, "At the same time, we are not experts in creating theme park attractions, so I think it's very important to have a great partner." This is at the heart of Nintendo's approach to a lot of things. As much as we think of the company as secretive and monolithic with its nondescript white Kyoto building full of unimaginable secrets, the company is only too keen to nurture long-term relationships, and indeed, many of its longest-standing franchises rely on partnerships with companies they don't own, but are still fundamental to the future of their projects, companies like HAL, Game Freak, and Intelligent Systems. Small wonder in this case Universal, who had proven to be good partners in both the theme park and the Mario movie were chosen. It possibly helped that they were based in Paris, where Nintendo also has a major base of operations. Their tech development team NERD are based there. However, while strong partners can be important, diversity is also key, and it's striking that when a deal over Zelda came to be struck, the company went with Avi Arad for the development partner they were going to choose. This did not reflect a breakup with Chris Meledandri. Far from it, Meledandri joined Nintendo's board of directors in 2021. Shuntaro Furukawa addressed the decision in the following investor Q&A. He said of Meledandri that he has gained broad experience and insight as a corporate manager in the field of entertainment, so we anticipate he will appropriately supervise our management from an objective perspective while providing valuable advice to our leadership. He went on, Mr. Meledandri has been appointed as an independent and non-executive outside director, so he will not be involved in execution of operation. However, we believe that his extensive experience and knowledge in the field of entertainment will have a beneficial effect on the decision-making of our board of directors. This just shows the seriousness with which Nintendo was now taking its film projects, although the purpose was still framed not so much as an end in itself, but as a chance to create opportunities where, as Furukawa-san says, even people who do not normally play video game systems can come into contact with Nintendo characters. Even at this late stage though, he emphasized the difficulties that creating visual content was throwing up for him and for Nintendo. He explained, the fact that we are a video game developing company tends to create the mistaken impression that we can also create movies easily. It's true that the process of making visual content and developing games shares some of the ways of thinking, but there are also many differences. The movie business, including distribution, is in a period of transformation. Against this backdrop, we think that asking for Chris's input as an expert with many years of experience in Hollywood will be of great help to us in the future. But while Nintendo continued with their customary caution and humility for experts in their field, something was changing, because not long after Meledondra's appointment, something important happened. Something that finally circles us back to the topic of this video, Nintendo Pictures. In an acquisition announced on the 14th of July 2022 and closing on the 3rd of October 2022, the company acquired 100% of shares in Dynamo, which they referred to as a company that plans and produces visual content. In terms of future business projections, they stated that it would have only a minor effect on Nintendo's results for this fiscal year. After all, the total capital needed for the buyout was 34.5 million yen, which is something like, in US dollars, $225,000. Still, from small acorns, great oak trees grow, and the choice of name alone clearly hints at a much larger ambition for the company that was just beginning. Actually, it began a lot earlier, given that Dynamo Pictures had been confidently supporting major projects, including doing motion capture on games like Persona 5 and Death Stranding. And I think it may be a clue to why they, above all the other possible animation teams Nintendo had worked with over the years, were given the nod. The CEO of Dynamo, Hiroshi Hirakawa, had been around since the Visual Science Laboratory Company Limited. Nintendo had expertise on their board in the movie business in large scale, and they had hired in individual animators or support teams as required for individual projects. But for motion capture, they needed something different. Now, the producers had always used some motion capture. Even 1998's Ocarina of Time utilizes this to some extent, although they tried to avoid it. However, it seems that motion capture has become a bigger element of their future plans. Now, it's perfectly possible that this doesn't link to their film aspirations at all. 2022 would be when many of the games due for the launch window of their next console would probably have started to enter the period of development where their initial designs were locked down and more complex animation work, including motion capture, could be undertaken. From Xenoblade Chronicles to Ring Fit Adventure, there are clearly a broad range of franchises which could, if pushed to be more graphically impressive, demand the use of motion capture, and that's even before you get to the possibility of completely new franchises. So far, Nintendo Pictures' credits have been relatively modest. They contributed heavily to Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Super Mario Bros. RPG on fields like character design and art, technical support, and project management. They also had credits on various projects they presumably had on the books prior to their acquisition by Nintendo, and have not just regular special thanks, but very special thanks on Pikmin 4 and Another Code Recollection. When the purchase was complete, the company had 105 members of staff. By November 2023, it had increased to 121 employees, and their website shows that they are clearly still hiring. Their senior figures are a curious mix of people. Hiroshi Hirakawa and Atsushi Shirakawa were inherited from Dynamo, while Imamoto-san appears to be a long-time Nintendo employee who was once credited on a Mario Party game. Being Nintendo, they have an auditor in there too. Then there's one interesting figure. The person Google Translate renders as Kanko Koizumi, I'm fairly sure is Yoshiaki Koizumi, a senior executive officer at Nintendo, the former head of development of the Nintendo Switch itself, as well as the genius behind many Mario games and even the bonkers stories of Link's Awakening and others. I think his presence is significant in multiple ways. Firstly, he is a lover of story and actually graduated from the Visual Concept Planning Department at Osaka University of Arts, with his course taking in film, drama, animation, and sub-storyboarding. His career at Nintendo interrupted his original plans to direct films, and his storytelling instincts sometimes rubbed his bosses at Nintendo the wrong way. He confessed, "I would sort of try to find sneaky ways to get story elements in without them noticing too much. There are aspects of the games that Miyamoto wasn't nearly as fond of, and occasionally didn't like." The difference in the level of storytelling between, say, Super Mario Galaxy and its sequel is one example of the tug-of-war over storytelling philosophy. But if Miyamoto won that battle, it seems Koizumi has won the war, as he now has a whole visual storytelling team. This leads to the second significant reason for his presence. Koizumi-san is no ordinary Nintendo director, even if such a thing could be said to exist. No, he's the producer behind the Entertainment Planning and Development Group 8, based in Tokyo, who produce the Super Mario 3D titles. It's striking that Nintendo Pictures have already been right in there supporting Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Super Mario Bros. RPG, so it'll be small wonder if the next 3D Mario title also receives heavy support from them. I think this allows us to infer something significant though. I think the next Super Mario 3D game will, with 90% certainty, utilise Nintendo Pictures, and while I'm not sure I can quantify this well enough to base a forecast on, I think it will be by far one of the most story and narrative-driven Super Mario titles to date. The jobs listing gives no clues, but they are extensive, with roles including character modelling, sets and props, editing, effects, storyboarding, and more organisational roles such as human resources. And while there are a relatively large amount of roles, we're not looking at a vast expansion here. Even a trip into the Wayback Machine reveals that in 2022 they were looking for similar kinds of roles, although a line producer was also in there. This is not some huge explosion. As we have come to expect from Nintendo, slow and steady is winning this race. So, Nintendo Pictures remains a small company. Its predecessor Dynamo had no credits linked to the Super Mario movie at all, and there's simply no way that Nintendo Pictures could, by itself, shoulder a motion picture even if Nintendo had the experience to do it. And as we've seen, the company is incredibly cautious and incredibly keen to respect the wisdom of people with far more experience in the film and television industry. So what's the plan with the Nintendo Pictures company? When it was launched and they started advertising, the message on Twitter read, Nintendo Pictures Company Limited, a Nintendo Group company, plans and produces videos using Nintendo IP. We are currently recruiting for various positions related to the planning and production of animated videos. If you are interested in creating videos for the enjoyment of consumers around the world, please apply. In March 2024, Shuntaro Furukawa told investors Nintendo Pictures Company Limited, which we made a subsidiary in 2022, is working on various initiatives in the visual content business and not just feature-length films. As with game development, our basic policy with visual content is to make announcements when we are satisfied that we have created something fun. In other words, as the creative teams go through the process of trial and error, we will make further announcements when we have something new to share. This is really interesting as it does give an idea of the broad scope of this new subsidiary. Firstly, we know that they are continuing to support CG work in games, and we can expect that to continue. His comment, not just feature film, doesn't preclude them from working on the next Super Mario Bros. Movie, or even the next Legend of Zelda movie title, but at this point it's difficult to see how they can be too involved except perhaps coordinating and helping to polish designs to make them more Nintendo-ish. But, like their counterparts on the game side of the ledger, they are being moulded in the Nintendo creative approach, which involves experimentation and a focus on joy and fun. This puts a very different complexion on what is likely to come out from the studio. Look, the best venue to leverage Super Mario as a character is clearly in traditional film. He is a big, iconic hero character with broad appeal, and you want the biggest mass market venue to display what that character is and to expose people to the Nintendo brand who have not experienced it before. Clearly they felt that a film was the right move for Zelda as well, but this time live action, perhaps particularly being aware of the series' relative popularity in the West, where animation is still somewhat less highly regarded by some, and of the popularity of the more mature aesthetic of Zelda titles as seen in Twilight Princess. But that's not to say that this is the only way to turn existing characters into visual content. Pikmin, for example, seem to be cropping up everywhere in Japan, and while I don't expect more Pikmin shorts, some kind of Pikmin-themed visual project wouldn't be a surprise, and rolling this out would certainly fit their development strategy for the brand, which, as I've covered in separate videos, seems now to cover everything from sandwiches to pens. Splatoon is another franchise that seems like it would fail in international hands, but Nintendo themselves might be able to find a way to capture the essence of the game in an audio-visual form that suits them. I think the key is that they're going to do things that are individualistic according to their own sense of fun, and they're going to do them in their own time. I do not expect a Nintendo Pictures developed motion picture this decade. At best, there's a 70% chance that Nintendo Pictures receives some form of credit on the Super Mario Bros. Movie 2 or on the next Zelda film, but even then I don't consider it a sure thing, because while they clearly already have a lot of experience with Nintendo's version of Mario, the movie Mario is quite different, and it's not clear to me what they would bring that Shigeru Miyamoto and the massive team of French animators aren't already bringing. However, I would expect Nintendo Pictures productions to start to emerge, whether sections within existing games, particularly on the next console, or as extras and oddities released to promote various franchises. Eventually, could this turn into a major studio for Nintendo? Absolutely it could. Does this seem to be either in the offing or even in Nintendo's head right now? Not really. I think they recognise that there is benefit in being open to exploring lots of different concepts, and so while the big partnership suits some franchises, owning Nintendo Pictures gives them a degree of freedom and creative control to explore this field in their own way and in their own time, and using that distinctively Nintendo quality of being able to surprise and delight. There is incidentally a precedent elsewhere in the video games industry, specifically Bandai Namco, who have a 296-person strong technology studio focused on elements like motion capture operating, with and working across all the different projects and studios they operate. At Nintendo's scale, there is always going to be a new game in train that requires this kind of technology, so rather than having to specifically hunt down people with specialist experience, as they had to do most notably with Metroid Other M in the late noughties, it makes sense for Nintendo to develop their own internal skills base. I would say there is a 90% chance of Nintendo Pictures being credited on at least one more game by the end of 2025, and a 70% chance of them being credited on a game before the end of 2024, probably Mario and Luigi Brothership, given that the last two original Mario games involved their work. But as for an original animation from them separate from a game, it doesn't appear that this is immediately on the cards, and it's devilishly impossible to forecast because it really depends on when Nintendo finds itself ready. There are obvious opportunities where Nintendo could do something animation themed in 2025 and 2026, such as the anniversaries of Mario and Zelda, but my hunch would be that they're just as likely to do some weird little Star Fox project that confuses everybody rather than go with the franchises people all expect. We should also note the way that Nintendo trains up its internal and external developers is often by having them stick close to an existing masterwork to start off. This channel has looked before the pattern of new production studios doing a remake and then being trusted with an original title, and we saw two such partnerships bear fruit in 2024 directly, as Echoes of Wisdom from Grezzo and Famicom Detective Club Emmy of the Smiling Man both followed up remakes in recent years. Is there a similar masterwork for them to cleave to learn the Nintendo method of cinematic storytelling, if such a thing exists? Here I'm going deeper into speculation territory, but Yoshiaki Koizumi was heavily involved in Ocarina of Time and was the co-director of Majora's Mask. I've been on the train that there will be an Ocarina of Time remake in the next few years for some time, and recently people have seized upon an Eiji Aonuma interview and his history of subtle teases to suggest that this is in the post. Nintendo likes to use its remakes and smaller Zelda games to experiment. Wind Waker HD allowed them to transition to HD. A Link Between Worlds let them try the kinds of mechanics that eventually became the open-air model of Zelda, and so on. What if they utilise Nintendo Pictures to give these games real cinema-quality cutscenes, but safe in the knowledge that the good folk they've hired aren't going to go too far out on a limb, but are developing one of the all-time great Nintendo stories. At this point, I think there is a 30% chance that there will be a Zelda title that Nintendo Pictures are credited on by the end of 2028. It's also possible that we will see more in the field of mobile phone games, and perhaps even on the next system. If augmented reality comes to be at the heart of their development objectives, and there's reason to believe it will be, this could represent the kind of off-the-wall experiment with animation that could distinguish a madcap Nintendo Pictures project from a more trad Universal Pictures or Sony Entertainment franchise blockbuster. It's difficult to know if we would ever be able to identify Nintendo Pictures' work on mobile, as the creators aren't generally credited, but it would still be an interesting outlet for the fledgling company. Finally, what is the chance that we see an original animation or film from them? A short would seem more probable than anything else, but with so much on their plate right now, it does seem unlikely in the short term, but obviously trending towards almost certain in the long term. I'm going to say there's only a 10% chance we see a discrete Nintendo Pictures animation before the end of 2025, rising to 30% by the end of 2026, 50% by the end of 2027, and 70% by the end of 2028, although those percentage figures may well be revised as we see how the studio expands, assuming it does, and how heavily they are utilised in other gaming contexts across the suite of new Nintendo video games. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out my deep dive into Nintendo systems. Wander over to Patreon, where I'll be previewing more of my future content, or just hit subscribe to see what's coming up. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again for another Nintendo Forecast.